Hi, welcome to Fish on Fridays. I'm Al McCauley. And today I want to talk about Lent. And, when you think about it as Catholics, when you think about Lent, you probably think about a time of solemn, sorrow and repentance and all that kind of stuff. We talked in the last episode about Ash Wednesday and our own mortality and all of that kind of stuff. And Lent is one of those times that's not necessarily positive. It's a time for reflection and change. It's a time for giving things up. I've said before, to suppress the physical, to raise the spirit, to raise the spiritual. And so it's not necessarily equated with fun. But I want to talk about some aspects of Lent that come down to us that have been around for centuries that are, dare I say, fun, or at least interesting. And so I want to start with this. Most of our traditions that we have about Lent in terms of abstaining from meat and things of that nature, that evolved over many centuries in the early church. And it really became well known with the Benedictine order. Now, the Benedictine order was started by a guy named Saint Benedict around the 6th century. And they were so well known and they were prolific throughout Europe. So that a lot of the traditions by the Benedictines kind of permeated throughout society. So it's Benedict who insisted that his followers, his monks, would not eat meat from any hooved animal during Lent. And so that became a tradition that all of Christianity, all of Christendom shared in. There were certain things he did allow, though, during Lent. He said, yeah, you can have certain things like you can have beer. Beer, interestingly, during Lent is something that a lot of people will give up. They'll give up alcohol. But beer in that time was called liquid bread because it had nutrients. It had the same kind of substantive ingredients that bread did. And if you think about it, at that time, drinking water was oftentimes kind of a risky proposition. It was dangerous because there were, all kinds of organisms in there that wasn't purified. And so people got sick, and they knew that. They didn't maybe understand why, but they knew they got sick. And so, but beer, I should say, being fermented, and wine is similar to this, going through a process of purification and cleaning, if you will, wasn't as dangerous. And so people drank it. In fact, it was consumed by everybody in the family, even children. Now, it was consumed in moderation, but still it was consumed. And so beer is one of those things that was allowed in Lent, and not to an excess, okay, not to the point where we're getting drunk, but certainly it was something that Benedict approved of and he allowed. Something else that was really important to consider is during Lent, the monks were asked to fast and have only one meal a day. And this, again, permeated throughout society. During Lent, people would have only one meal a day, and that was usually at dinner. Okay, so at what we would call dinner time or supper time, in the late afternoon, early evening. The problem is the majority of society in Europe at that time were laborers. They worked outdoors and they did backbreaking, strenuous work. And so the problem is that they were not able to do that. They couldn't be sustained on only one meal. They didn't have the energy. They didn't keep up their strength, especially over a 40-day period, I should say, of Lent. And so Benedict, his monks included, they were farmers and they had crops and they raised cattle and they did all those kinds of things. So what Benedict said is, if you are a laborer, I'm going to allow you to have a small meal when you wake up in the morning. And what are you doing? In the morning, when you wake up and you have that small meal, you are breaking your fast. And it's that tradition that we get our word still today of breakfast. The word breakfast comes to us because of the Benedictines centuries ago who broke their fast to give sustenance and was able to sustain laborers throughout the day so they could make it to their full meal at the end of the day. One of those neat, fun little things about Lent that we get from our Catholic faith. One of the other Lenten traditions that comes down to our own time started in the 7th century with another Benedictine monk, and this time in Italy. And what he did was he was a cook, and he took dough. And again, bread was allowed, obviously, but he would take dough and he would break it into and stretch it into small strips. And then he would intertwine it in such a way that it looked like folding hands in prayer. And he called these, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, pretiolas, which means little rewards. And he would bake them and he would put some salt on it to give it a little bit of flavor, because it was just basic dough. There was no sugar. There was none of that kind of stuff. It wasn't a pastry. But he would then bake these, and he would give them to his students. Again, it's called little rewards, because he would give them to his students who memorized their prayers. And if they behaved well, or if they were caught behaving in a good way, he would give them as a little reward. Pretziolas, of course, comes down to us as the word pretzels. Now, this was picked up all throughout Christianity, and it really became synonymous in Germany. German monks became proficient at making pretzels in great numbers. And it became a tradition for German children and families to celebrate on Good Friday what we remember is the Lord's passing, obviously, the suffering and death and crucifixion of Jesus, but they would celebrate or remember that by eating pretzels. It was a very simple bread meal, and it was something that reminded them to pray, and going into the oven and baking reminded them of the idea of suffering, that we need to suffer the fires, if you will, to be tempered in fire, as Jesus was, to emerge, to give new life, to give sustenance, to become the bread of life for all of us. And so it was remembered that way in Germany in particular. Now, interesting, when German immigrants, several centuries later, that tradition continued for generations. Several centuries later, when German immigrants came to this country, they brought that tradition with them. And so you started to see pretzel bakeries pop up in America, where there were a large number of German immigrants. And where we saw most of those were in Pennsylvania. Okay, there are a lot of Germans, Pennsylvania Dutch, meaning Deutsch, the Germans in Pennsylvania. You saw Pennsylvania as the hub of if you will, of the pretzel baking world, and still is today. It's fascinating to think about this because, and I'm going to read this, Pennsylvania still today supplies 80% of the pretzels made in the world. That's crazy when you think about it, 80%. And so it's a great snack that we enjoy today, but it is something that we can enjoy with our beer during Lent, again, in moderation. One last little nugget about Lent, and specifically Catholic traditions. In the United States in 1962, there was a guy named Lou Green who owned a McDonald's franchise in Cincinnati, Ohio. And in the early 60s, he noticed that people were not visiting. This was a very highly Catholic area in which this McDonald's was located. And he was recognizing that people, Catholics in particular, they weren't coming to his restaurant because he offered, hamburgers. And so in 1962, he decided to add a menu item, a fish sandwich, to his menu so that Catholics would come back to his restaurant on Friday so he wouldn't lose money. And thus was born the Filet-O-Fish sandwich. And that, of course, spread throughout the whole corporate world of McDonald's, that is, of the franchise of McDonald's. And it's still in existence today, the Filet-O-Fish sandwich. So even that is rooted in our Catholic tradition, our Catholic practices, our Catholic faith. So something to be very, very proud of. I hope you have a blessed Lent and even more blessed Easter celebration, Holy Weekend and Easter celebration. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to share this with someone, that'd be great. If you would continue to watch us on Facebook and follow or subscribe to our YouTube channel, that would be wonderful. Please feel free to leave comments. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you'll keep tuning in for more Fish on Fridays. Until next time, be good to each other and God bless.